Hi, I'm Laura King, and I am the network chair for the Jewish Federations of North America, and I'm here today with Dr. Robert Adler. We're going to speak today about his experiences of his father, who escaped from Vienna, was helped by the Pope Pius XII, and arrived in the 12th, excuse me. And arrived in the Dominican Republic, eventually saving his life. And Dr. Adler, can you state your name and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Dr. Robert Leon Adler. I'm a professor of foreign languages here at the University of North Alabama. I grew up in New York City, where I went to elementary, high school, and college, and I did my graduate work at Washington University in St. Louis before coming here to Alabama.
And today you serve on the Holocaust Commission here in Alabama?
Yes, I'm on the Alabama Holocaust Commission, also in the Education Committee. I was appointed by Governor Riley a few years ago.
Very nice. If you wouldn't mind, if you would just begin your story about your father return to Vienna and his eventual journey that began in 1940 to reach the Dominican Republic.
It's a very interesting story that he began to tell me in little pieces when I was a child, and some I remembered, some I didn't remember, and then he would remind me, but generally not talk very much about it. But it started to a large degree when he was pretty young. My father was the middle child of three. He had a younger sister and an older sister, living in Vienna, right downtown. And he was one of the bully boys in the street. Also a mountain climber. He did a lot of things. His father. His biological father passed away when he was very young. I really don't know when or under what circumstances, but his mother remarried, so he was living with his mother and his stepfather. And when he was a teenager, for various reasons, my dad wanted to be a dentist. His father wanted him to work in the grocery store. They didn't see eye to eye, so my father ran away from home and joined the French Foreign Legion for 6 years, where he fought in North Africa, and he was a guard on Devil's Island and things like this. So after 6 years, he had disappeared from Vienna. All of a sudden, there was a knock on his mother's door. She opens the door, and there he was after 6 years. She hadn't seen him. And he moved back to Vienna. He started a business. He got married and started a life there. And then came the Anschluss in, I believe it was March of 1938. And things started to happen for the Jews in Germany and in Austria. His stepfather said, "Don't worry, they're not going to bother us because I fought for Austria in World War I." Well, he was wrong because things did happen. They were deporting Jews from all over the country. And so my father, having been a mountain climber and knowing the passes into Switzerland, was helping people escape into neutral Switzerland. When he was caught by the Nazis out in the countryside, he was taken to a feeder camp, and he was being transported from a feeder camp to another camp when he escaped from the train, from one of those transport trains, with a German priest. Since he was with the German priest, they decided to seek asylum in Italy in the Vatican, and he was able to get in there. He spent, as far as I know, between 5 weeks or 2 months or 6 weeks in the Vatican. He met Pope Pius. He told me this several times, that he met Pope Pius XII, and it was there that he was able to find out that Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, the head of state of the Dominican Republic, had declared in 1938 that he wanted European refugees to come to the Dominican Republic. There was a community in the central north of the country of Sosua, that was primarily European Jews, but they had been there for quite a long time, and it was dispersing. So he wanted to refortify the Jewish community in the Dominican Republic, and so he wanted up to 100,000 European refugees. It turns out he only got about 800. And my dad was one of them.
He's a very lucky one.
Very fortunate.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions regarding the time your father was actually at the Vatican. We understand that your father was protected there in the Vatican. Did he ever indicate how many Jews were also sheltered in the Vatican at that time?
No, he never spoke about the situation there. He had told me that he was there, that he met Pope Pius, but that was really as far as it went. He didn't tell me where exactly he lived, or how many other people, or what the situation was there in the Vatican. But like I said, this is where he found out that Trujillo wanted European refugees to come, and they facilitated the visas that were necessary. So he was able to get a transit visa through France to go into Spain, because the head of state in Spain, General Francisco Franco, one of the reasons he and Hitler did not get along is that Franco refused to deport his Jews. To him, the Jews and the Muslims, the Arabs, were very important to the history of Spain and to the culture of Spain, and he wanted to acknowledge that and preserve that. And he actually issued an edict saying that any Jew with a shred of Spanish heritage could come to Spain and be safe. And other Jews could pass through Spain on their way to other countries. And my father was connected through the connections at the Vatican with the consulate of Spain, and was able to get a visa to be able to go through there. So he went from Italy through southern France into Spain, through Portugal. He had a visa for that too.
And before you go any further, I know that you brought documents here today
Yes,
that
I did.
show that, and I was wondering if you would show that to the camera.
Yes, of course.
Your father's passport from Nazi-occupied Austria.
This one was very interesting, the Deutsches Reich. And when we look inside, it has the Riesenpass?
The Rice Pass.
Rice Pass, and it has the red J for
Jew.
Exactly. And his picture inside with the stamp, with the swastika. So this is an authentic passport for him, and it describes where he was, where he had to go. We've got stamps from Italy, in the consulate of France in Italy, the consulate of the Dominican Republic in Italy, for him to have the visas to be able to go through. This was in September of 1939. Then, in case he had to pass through Panama, he could pass through Panama. He had a visa to go there. Here, through Portugal.
So he was already in Italy in 1939. He had already gone.
Right.
Okay.
So it was very soon after. So this, to a large degree, here we have the consulate in Italy of Spain, getting the necessary documentation to be able to make those travels. Here's the letter of transit through France. So he could pass through France and go to Spain. So he had to pass through and get out of the country. Also his entry into New York, and it says 1 day in transit to the Dominican Republic. And on the next page is from the Dominican consulate in New York, allowing him to travel to the Dominican Republic. And here's his entry on July 13th, 1941, into Puerto Plata. The Dominican Republic is a city in the north part of the island. Okay. So this, to a large degree, shows his travels.
So from 1939 until 1941.
It took him
to get out
there.
of Europe into the Dominican Republic.
Exactly. And also, this Austrian passport that was issued in the Dominican Republic. Even though it says Austria up here, it was issued in Ciudad Trujillo, this allowing him to be there. And
I'm curious, does that passport also identify him by religion?
this one does not. It eye color, domicile, and hair color, and these kinds of things, but no, it doesn't.
Interesting.
And here, his admission into Spain, into the United States, in September of 1948, because, as I said, in Spain, in the Dominican Republic, he met my mother, and it was interesting because my grandfather, my mother's father, was Postmaster General of the Dominican Republic. So it was very curious when they met, because my mother didn't speak German, my father didn't speak Spanish, so they spoke French when they first met.
Oh, that's a nice story.
Exactly. And he had a business. He had a trucking business. He was trucking lumber from different places around the country. So since my grandfather was Postmaster General, my dad had government connections, so he was able to get tires, he was able to get gasoline. He had a wonderful life there. He didn't, and when she got pregnant with me, she wanted to come to the United States because this is after the war. The United States is the greatest country in the world. I want my son to be born there. I want my child to be born there. He said, no, I'm not going. Because he had...
So he fell in love with the Dominican Republic.
Absolutely. He had it made there. But she was who she was.
Right.
And she came to New York. She stayed first with his younger sister, who was already in New York with her family. And he came right before I was born, because I was born in December, and here he's leaving in September. So
he kind of waited to the last minute.
he waited till the last minute, exactly, and stayed in New York, and actually never left the country. Yes, we did travel into Canada and places like this, but he never left the country.
So when you went to the Dominican Republic, it was with your mother?
It was by myself first.
Yourself.
My parents started sending me to Dominican Republic to spend the summers when I was 7 years old, because they wanted me to be aware of that part of my family also. So in New York, I was raised in a Jewish community, in a Jewish atmosphere. I started going to Hebrew school at 6 years old, these kinds of things. But the language in my home pretty much was Spanish, especially when I was very young. And they wanted me to be aware of that part of my family. Also, they wanted to get me off the streets of New York for the summer when I wasn't in school. That was important too, so they sent me down.
Your father having known about those things.
Right. Right. So at 7 years old, I remember they took me to the airport, and I had a sign with name and address on both countries printed on. They handed me to the stewardess, and I did the 7-hour trip to the Dominican Republic, and I remember it precisely because on the way down I fell asleep and I missed breakfast. So even though Pan American doesn't exist anymore, the airline industry still owes me a meal. So I don't miss a meal on airplanes because they owe me one. But anyway, and it was very important for me, and I'm very glad that they did this for me, to show me that part of my family. So I lived with my grandfather, my aunt, who was the youngest of the sisters. They were, I think, 3 sisters and 1 brother, and my cousin, and it was very good to have that and to be able to do that.
If you don't mind, I just want to go over a couple of questions with
Certainly.
you too before we leave that particular area. There was a letter that's in the archive now that written by a woman named Luciano Zevi, and she reports that her family had an audience with Pope Pius XII in 1947. And she claims that her uncle identified the Pope, who was dressed in Franciscan robes and was physically actually in the Jewish ghetto, and brought him into the Vatican. She then stated that Cardinal Montini, which Paul VI, standing next to Pius XII, immediately silenced her uncle and told him never, never to repeat this story. Have you heard of any similar stories like this?
No, no. Well, from my father, no. But later on, this began to interest me, and I started to investigate what happened with Pope Pius, with Franco, certainly, since I study and teach Spanish and have lived in Spain. And so I begin to see stories that are very similar. My dad never talked about who was there, what other Jews were there, what Pope Pius did with other people. He did tell me that he did meet him personally because he was there for several weeks. He did meet him personally several times.
Did they speak?
Yes.
And do you remember anything about the conversation?
Not really, not really. These are not things that he told me specifically about. Especially in later life, when I knew more about this, because my father didn't pass away until the year 2000. He was 94, and he was pretty coherent until then. But he absolutely refused to talk about these stories. He didn't want to bring back those memories, and I would ask him again and again when I went to, because this was important, and at that age, I knew that he was going to not going to be around very much longer, and I really wanted to know and really wanted to preserve these kinds of stories, and he absolutely refused to tell me this, and it's very common for survivors to not talk about this because they were horrific memories.
Right. Yeah.
So those kinds of things I don't know specifically from my father. Now, through research that I've done and things that I've read, yes, I've heard similar stories, but from him personally, no.
Okay. Do you remember, or did your father ever say the name of the individual, the priest that brought him to the Vatican?
No. I only know that it was a German priest.
He was a German priest.
Right.
Okay. And did he ever encounter him after he went to the Vatican? So once he arrived, he was... Once
he arrived, I guess they were there together, but once my father left, there was nothing else, no more communication.
Further contact with
right.
him.
And it's curious because when I was in the service for 3 years. I was in the army for 3 years, and I was stationed about 2 years in Heidelberg, Germany. And naturally, I asked my father if he would come take me visit. I said, "And no way,
right?
Absolutely not."
Not surprising.
Yeah, but in the year before, a few years before, because I studied in Spain in the 69-70 academic year. I was there for 11 months. And my father told me, do not come home unless you've been to Vienna. So we still had
love for Vienna.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We still had
and
relatives in Vienna. And he wanted me to see them. Unfortunately.
And you met them? Or?
I only left three or four days to go to Vienna. I was sorry I should have left more time to see that because it was a fascinating place. And I did meet them. And they took me to my father's original home, and they explained he was there and he did this and this.
Nice,
and all kinds of
very
things.
Nice. Probably stories you didn't get from your father.
Exactly. I've heard stories about him being the bully boy.
So that's how you know he was the bully boy?
Yeah, I heard stories about him, yeah.
Well, the French Foreign Legion sort of gave that away.
Absolutely.
Too.
Absolutely. But he personally, there was no way that he was going to go back to Europe.
And which is pretty normal reaction to that. Although I know recently a lot of people toward the end of their lives have begun to do that. But I know it's a very difficult thing to do. We understand also that there exists a photograph of Jewish protectees that were hidden and were helping with the evacuation under St. Peter's Basilica. Did your father ever mention where the Jews were hiding or working at this evacuation project at all?
As I said, he never explained to me what he did there, besides being there for 5-6 weeks. He never told me what circumstances, where he lived, what he did during that time. Not that I remember him telling me any specifics about what happened there.
We just know that he was at the Vatican.
Yes, that he was there and that he met Pope Pius, and sheltered there. Whatever sheltered means at that time.
We're aware also that the Vatican was the entity that worked hard to get the transit documents, like you were showing earlier, the visas, and they arranged transportation for Jews leaving Europe. One of the eyewitness testimonies was from Monsignor Giovanni Ferrofino. He was 98, and he was a priest who physically worked directly under the Pope and was sent to Portugal to meet with the president to request entry visas into Portugal. And you've just showed me one.
Visas into Spain, into Portugal, into Panama, into the Dominican Republic, through transit visas through France, all these things. And I'm sure that they were facilitated by these mechanisms, organized by the Vatican.
Later, he was posted as a secretary to the nuncio, Archbishop Maurizio Silvani, to the Dominican Republic.
Curiously enough.
Yes, I didn't. I know that you read my notes earlier, so you know this. Monsignor Sentioni would travel with the nuncio at least 2 times per year from 1939 to 1945, which corresponds with what you've showed us, to request visas for fleeing Jews. He and Nuncio would drive 1.5 days directly to meet with General Tuido with a double encrypted telegram directly from Pope Pius XII that would request a specific number of visas for Jews leaving both Spain and Portugal. And he estimates that well over 12,000 visas were obtained by his personal efforts. Now, the figure that actually came to the Dominican Republic that you researched
was about 800.
Was only 800.
But as you saw in the documentation, he stopped in several places. So in order to get there, including New York City, even though it was a one-day transit.
So we can count these as multiple visas for an
for
individual.
One way, or it could be that people doing that trip decided to stay in one place and not actually get to the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably true because it goes on. The documents that we have show that Monsignor Ferrofino also helped Jews in the Dominican Republic to travel to the U.S. through Canada, Cuba, and Mexico, and some of those remained, and so they didn't continue on to Dominican Republic.
Some didn't continue, and some got there and then went somewhere else.
Was your father aware that it was the Vatican that obtained the travel documents for him? Okay.
Yeah, and it is really evident in that passport because all of these are in Italy.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So Italy was the country he left Europe from.
Right.
From the Vatican prior to arriving from Vienna.
And no, after arriving from Vienna.
Yeah, excuse me. After arriving from Vienna, he was taken to the Vatican. So he escaped somewhere between Vienna and.
And I would assume that it's somewhere between a feeder camp in Austria and a concentration camp. He may have been in Germany or someplace else, and that's where he escaped with the German priest, and they made their way down
through the Alps.
to Rome, to the Vatican, because as I said, my dad had been a mountain climber, so he knew all the passes, he knew all the routes, and all these things.
When your father came to the Dominican Republic, did he ever mention that he had any contact with any of the Catholic clergy there after he arrived?
That I don't know. That I don't know. I would assume because my my mother's family is Catholic. My grandfather was a 33rd degree Mason, so he had that kind of thing too. And I remember going to Mass with them and these kinds of things. So I'm sure, and being a high government official, I'm sure he had interactions with church officials in the Dominican Republic. Now, my father personally, maybe not. He had a trucking business going at this time, and like I said, after he escaped by himself with the German priest, leaving his wife and his mother and his stepfather, who were deported and taken to concentration camps. Certainly.
Okay. Another eyewitness testimony that we have is from Monsignor Giancarlo Cintioni. Monsignor Cintioni personally obtained cash and Vatican passports directly from the papal household, and it was specifically to help Jews escape to Switzerland. Did your father receive any cash or a Vatican passport for his journey? Are you aware of where this money or passport, and was he aware of where the money or passport would have come from? You stated earlier that he understood that the Vatican arranged the passport. Was he given cash or anything to travel through Switzerland, or it was, judging from the passport I saw, it looked like he went Italy toward Milan and then cut through France and did not go through Switzerland?
Going in through France and into Spain.
Okay, so
into Spain.
Switzerland was not part of his journey. So
no,
okay.
He was captured, helping people escape into Switzerland, because Switzerland was neutral.
In the beginning.
At that time. Well, when I look at those visas, they're paid for. Some of them are paid for in dollars.
So that's interesting.
Yes, it's very interesting.
Which brings me to the next question,
exactly.
which leads right into one of them.
It would be the Vatican who would have access to dollars in order to pay those kinds of things.
And this leads me to another question that may have something to do with those dollars. Relatives of a lot of the survivors who did travel to Dominican Republic told us that it was a Jewish relief agency which arranged their transport. Are you aware of a Jewish agency that did handle these issues, and can you explain how they would obtain travel documents?
I'm not aware of it through my father.
Okay, so he never mentioned any Jewish
No, he never
agency?
mentioned how he got there. Some of the visas have to do with airfare, so he flew to a lot of these places. And who arranged that, who paid for it, and things like this, that I don't know through him. No.
Okay. I mean, we know that there were Jewish agencies operating in the area, like the Joint Distribution Committee.
Right.
And
so it's likely that one of them helped him, but I don't know for sure.
Have you ever contacted the Joint Distribution Committee and to see if there's anything on your father in the archives there?
No, I haven't yet.
Would you like me to check on that for you?
Absolutely. I would like to know more of the story, because here, well, Pope Pius was crucial in all of this, and his personal activity and what he set up within the Catholic Church definitely helped so many Jews. My father as
your
an
father
example.
Wouldn't be alive without his intervention.
But there were so many others. Trujillo also, the same kind of thing.
I'm just kind of curious if Pope Pius XII also worked with some of the agencies as well.
Very likely.
Quietly on the side.
Yeah, he certainly met with Franco, with General Franco, and had influence with Trujillo also. So he was, as the Pope, in contact with these kinds of high officials in Catholic countries like this.
Yeah, so there was no question that without his influence, there would have been no escape to the Dominican Republic. And
there's no question for me about that. It had to be through him and the organization that he set up.
Would you like to show some of the photographs of your father?
Certainly. I think this one is an important one inside this passport. of him, because here he's got a stamp with the swastika, and there it is. My parents' wedding picture.
Nice.
I do have a larger version at home that's framed.
Wow.
This one.
So you had that made, I guess, from this photo?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think so, that it was made from this.
When you visited your relatives, did they share photos with you too?
Yes, they did.
Wonderful.
Yes, they did. They showed me, and of his parents. He did manage to get some pictures out. It may have been also from his younger sister, who was in New York. This is his mother,
Mm-hmm.
and his mother and his stepfather. These are two pictures of his mother and his stepfather. So he was able to obtain these pictures, and I had them in my home. I haven't seen these in years and years and years. I forgot that I even had them.
It was fortuitous that
and
you
I found them this
yeah.
morning as I was looking for things to bring here. So very curious.
When your father was in the Dominican Republic, did he have any contact with others that had escaped to the Dominican Republic?
Well, it's very likely, because he was in Sosua, in this town,
Mm-hmm.
for a short time
Mm-hmm.
in the north. But then, when he met my mother, his life changed pretty much, and also, as I said, he had a trucking business,
Mm-hmm.
and he was very involved with that. So chances are that he had less contact with Jews in that community.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a pretty strong community there, and I'm sure that he had contact
today,
with them.
What is it like there today? Do you know?
It's a small town.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a small town at the end of a dirt road.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious how many of the people that came are actually still resident in the Dominican Republic today.
I'm curious about that too. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no people that you could speak that you're aware of that you're in contact with
Well,
in
not
the
that I'm in
Dominican
contact
Republic
with.
that had similar circumstances as your father?
There are some, and a couple of years ago, at one of the colleges in New York, they did an exhibit, but I wasn't able to contact them at the time, but I still do have the contact information of the people who set that up, and I'd like to contact them to see and what kinds of things they have.
Well, I may be able to help you with some of
Okay.
that. I'll just get some information from you, and there are people that can do a lot of that tracking down. That
Because
keep
it's-
archives of the Jewish people and where everyone went.
Because there were so few, as I said, there were only about 800
Mm-hmm.
who came during this period. So chances are that there are records there of their activity.
And when your father came to the United States, how did he spend the rest of his life? What did he do?
He was already in his mid-40s, so he actually went into the garment business with his brother-in-law. He became a garment finisher. He only worked for his brother-in-law a very short time because he didn't want to work for his brother-in-law. So he worked for a couple of other companies until he retired. And then when he retired from the garment business, he went to work for Kennedy Airport as a security sergeant, because he spoke German, he spoke Spanish, he spoke Portuguese, he spoke Italian, he spoke French. So being able to speak so many languages, he was optimal for this kind of activity. And he worked in that at least 10 years. That I remember, if not longer, at Kennedy Airport in New York.
Probably the French Foreign Legion background didn't hurt either.
It didn't hurt, exactly. So he was pretty much of a go-getter. Unfortunately, he smoked for 60 years. His doctor, who was my cousin's Rita's husband, said that if he hadn't smoked for 60 years, he would have lived to about 120. This way, he only died at only 94.
Nice.
But the last years, he had emphysema, he had pleurisy, various diseases from having smoked for such a long time. But he was pretty active right to the end. He even got married again because my mother passed away. She was very young. She was 47 when she passed away. She died right before I turned 13, right before my bar mitzvah. And he remarried at 82.
Wow.
Yep.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
No. I'm an only child.
You're the only child.
When I came out, my parents took one look at me and said, "We're not making any more of those."
I don't believe that, but okay, I saw your picture, so I know that's not true. But you didn't show in the interview. But, so when did you become interested? I know today that you're on the Holocaust Commission here in Alabama. And when did your interest, when did you become knowledgeable of basically what happened in the Holocaust and about your father?
I think it was pretty much, well, first my experience in Spain, because I spent my senior year studying in Seville, and the Jewish heritage of Spain is very important, just like the Muslim heritage. So you see it, you feel it. I got interested in flamenco music, and flamenco is very Jewish and Arabic, and all of this, and gypsy. So that started to come out, and I started to see things. But then, definitively, it was in graduate school in St. Louis.
And how old were you?
I was 21.
21. Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of it had to do with my dissertation supervisor, because he was Jewish and he had a similar story. His parents left Germany and they went to Cuba, and he was born and raised as a child in Cuba. So he was interested in it.
Did they come through the Vatican as well?
No, no. They went directly to Cuba. But he started talking to me about this. Oh, we have a similar story, and that's where I started to get interested, and asking my father about various things. That
how did your
generally
father
speaking,
take that?
He didn't want to talk about it.
So the first time you approached him, he was, go away?
Yeah, essentially go away. I told you stories, that's enough. I didn't want to bring back those memories, and that was right until the end, because when I graduated with my PhD, I sent him a plane ticket to come to St. Louis, because this was going to be my last graduation. And he came to St. Louis, and he met my dissertation supervisor, Dr. Joseph Schreibman, and they started talking about that period of time. And Joe would say, this and this happened in this place, and my father was there, so he talked about this. And later on in the evening, in the hotel room, he told me, "I'm sorry that I talked about those things, because it brought back those memories." And
was he visibly depressed afterwards? Or?
I wouldn't say depressed, but he just didn't want to talk about it. He just didn't want to talk about it, because it was a horrific. It's the most horrific experience that we can imagine. That kind of brutality.
And what of the rest of your father's family?
Well,
you said some actually are in Vienna today.
There were some.
Or were in the 70s.
In Vienna, distantly related cousins, things like this. His younger sister and her husband were in New York. They have both passed away, but I have their 3 children. I have 3 cousins from them. My cousin Lenny, who was the oldest, he and I we grew up on the same block until we were 6 years old. He still lives right upstate New York in Muncie. And he and his family are Orthodox. The eldest sister, she went to Australia and had a family there. She and her husband have passed away, but we still have cousins. I think there are 2 or 3
so she stayed in
girls.
Australia? She
stayed in Australia, right. She had gotten a letter of transit from him, and that's a story also, because he had obtained a letter of transit to go to Australia, and he was getting ready to go, and she said she was intending to marry, And she said, please, 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 let me have your letter of transit, let me have your letter of transit, let me have your letter of transit. She drove him crazy, and he said, okay, I'll let you have it, but when you get to Australia, send for me. And when she got to Australia, she sent for Philip, her husband, and my father was stuck in Austria and Vienna, and
had to look for another way out.
Exactly, had to look for another way out.
So I'm assuming, since he was helping so many people escape, that he eventually had planned his escape and not what it turned out to be.
Exactly.
This incredible journey that he ended up on.
Exactly.
That took from 39 to 41 to finally reach the Dominican Republic.
Yep.
Going back to you serving on the Holocaust Commission, just have a brief question about that. Have you told the other members your personal story?
I have told my story. We have had on the commission, since I've been on it, 2 Holocaust survivors. There's one who's still on the commission, Max Herzl. He's the treasurer, and also I'm also on the education committee. So I've been invited to.
This is the Holocaust Education Committee?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's part of the commission, and we do travel around and speak in schools and in organizations and things like this. So I've done that a number of times, and also every year on the Day of Remembrance, we have a commemoration at the legislature in Montgomery, and the last few years Governor Riley has come to speak, and precisely in this publication, Southern Jewish Life, from June 2010, the picture, Riley addresses Alabama Holocaust commemoration, and there's a picture of Governor Riley speaking here, and here survivors or family of survivors come up to light candles in memory of the Holocaust victims, and I'm standing right here. So this is a very interesting and very moving event to be there in the legislature with legislators, with survivors, with people who are interested in this. There are even schools that come that bring students to witness this. They're up in the balcony and things like this. So this is a yearly commemoration, and it's a very important one, very, very moving one. So the community here is aware of this. They have this cut out on the bulletin board in the temple, and then it writes Robert.
Are you a member of the local temple?
Yes, and I've been president of the congregation for a couple of years also.
Wonderful.
I'm not now, but I have been. A few years ago. Yes, the Jewish community here is important to me also, and we do events like this and speaking.
And I'm just curious, also, given the fact that historically Pope Pius XII has been vilified in many articles and historical books. I'm just curious what the other survivors that have served with you on the commission, what was their reaction to your story, to hear that the Pope had helped your father?
Well, their reaction first was surprise, and then understanding, because had Pope Pius publicly declared against Hitler, would have been disastrous for the Catholic Church. So this way he was able to maintain the network of the Catholic Church in these countries and be able to help Jews. He was enough of a statesman and enough of aware to know that if they had declared against Hitler,
then Hitler would have declared war on them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the examples of this is that my father escaped.
And Hitler was planning to declare war on them.
Absolutely.
It was the understanding is that after the Jews, the Catholics would have been next. Had he been able to continue.
Yeah, and evidence of this is that my father escaped with a German priest. So there was a German priest on the train getting transferred to a concentration camp. So the Catholic Church was to some degree under the gun or at least the Nazis had their eye on the church.
Sure, they definitely had their eye on the church. That's,
exactly.
And historically, even recently, you're seeing more and more of that. Those the documents and the testimony to show that that was coming.
Exactly.
That as soon as they had finished with the so-called Jewish problem, the Catholics were the next.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they were going to be part of the final solution.
So even though probably historically, and there's reasons to support that, Pope Pius XII was, prior to ascension to the papacy, that he already had been speaking out against the Nazis. There's documenting, but
exactly.
The ends justify the means. In this case, he was able to save lives and understood that had he stood up, chances are those lives would have gone. So
Absolutely.
he had to make a terrible choice from the sound of it.
And my feeling is absolutely he did the right thing.
Well, lives were at stake, so I'm sure that the Catholic papacy feels the same way we do. Life is precious.
Yeah. And in this passport, you could see the connections that
it tracks along with all of it tracks along with all the documentation that we already have.
Exactly.
That talks about the journeys that people took, thanks to the Vatican and the visas.
And the heads of state who were influenced by the Pope and by the Church.
So, in your opinion, we owe the Pope Pius XII
a great debt.
A great debt and gratitude.
Absolutely.
And we should definitely recognize historically what the real facts are, rather than allow the constant vilification that's taken place.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank you for telling your story.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me do that.
It's a pleasure, and I hope that this will help to set the record straight.
I hope so, because Yad Vashem is a very important entity, and has a lot of our respect, and recognizes people who have done so much for the Jews in the world.
Yes, I mean the program to recognize righteous Gentiles, and because what we have to remember, even in all the horror that we experienced at this time, there were good people.
Absolutely.
And as always, the worst people always make the headlines, and the people that quietly that are preserving the world, basically by their good deeds, largely go unnoticed or untold. And in this case, untold for obvious political reasons.
Exactly.
It couldn't be told. So
Exactly.
I thank you for your courage and
thank you
willingness
very much.
to speak up. Thank you very much.